Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Monday, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce Sarah Bailey, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you, Karina.
Lovely to have you. Your background's in advertising and communications, but you took to crime writing in 2017 with your first novel, The Dark Lake. It featured police detective Gemma Woodstock, and it became an international bestseller. And The Dark Lake also won both the Davitt Award and the Ned Kelly Award for Best Debut. We've had 2 more books in the Gemma Woodstock series since then, and in August, your new standalone novel, The Housemate, is being released. And I'll just add a little teaser with the log line, because it's so good. 1 dead, 1 missing, and 1 accused of murder. I can't wait. So before we get to the questions, can you please give us your elevator pitch for The Housemate?
I will try. So The Housemate is a standalone novel. It doesn't feature the detective or any of the characters from my other books. The main character in The Housemate is Olive Groves, a journalist in Melbourne who worked on a case when she was first a journalist back in the early 2000s, and then 10 years later, just when she's preparing a feature article about the anniversary of that crime, one of the housemates that had been missing turns up dead. So the cold case kind of hots right up, and everybody is back to kind of armchair detective and speculating about what happened and who did what, and Ollie's thrown right back into the thick of things. And to further complicate things, she's now engaged to the husband of the former detective that led the case, who has since passed away. So she is kind of walking in the footsteps of her soon-to-be husband's dead wife. So lots going on for Ollie. Yeah.
Oh, sounds fantastic. Okay, well, let's get to our questions. I'll just give them a quick shuffle and off we go. Who are your writing inspirations?
Gosh, there is so many people that I'm really jealous of in the writing world. So I kind of feel like I add to that list every time I read a book these days. There's so many amazing writers out there. I've always really liked Kate Atkinson. I've obviously never met her, but I think she's amazing. And I just think her Jackson Brodie crime series is so original and clever and different. So I think that's probably someone I always come back to. But I think people like Patricia Cornwell really inspired me to write in the first place. Like I loved her Case Scarpetta books when I was a teenager, and I think that creation of like an enduring character really appealed to me. So I think that was certainly behind the reason why I tried to write a trilogy in the first place.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, honestly, I love all genres and I do read pretty broadly. So I find myself admiring and also sort of being really in awe of different writers all the time.
Yeah. Do you start with the plot or the character or something else?
I think I normally start with sort of a question, like a kind of a what if, almost a premise, I suppose. So I think for The Housemate, it was probably, what if a journalist who'd worked on a case when she was a kind of cadet got sucked back into the same case with new evidence sort of 10 years later. And then it kind of went from there. I think with The Dark Lake, it was sort of similar, like, what if a popular teacher was found dead the morning after a play at the local high school? And then sort of, again, you sort of build the story around that. So I think I generally start with the premise, but I do find that pretty quickly the main character in particular, or sometimes, secondary characters really take the sort of the stage in terms of they're all I can kind of think about. So yeah, premise first, main characters, and then I think all of the other stuff's just like brush strokes on top of that.
Lovely. How many drafts do you write before handing it in?
Well, I think if I was a more organized writer, I'd be able to answer you properly, and I'd have actual sort of like numbered drafts that are sort of coherent. But I tend to kind of just continually revise and revise and revise, and I'm not even sure you'd call it a draft. It kind of feels like I'm just constantly sort of picking at it and moving things around and changing words and rearranging paragraphs and things like that. So I mean, I think I probably do about 10 drafts before I even consider it a draft and hand it in to my agent in the first instance. And then I'll do sort of one revision with her feedback, and then it will go to my publisher. I'll normally do one pass at it based on her feedback, and then it goes to the editor, and that can depend. So I'd say at least 4. But like I said, I think that first draft is almost, you know, a series of drafts in itself.
Yeah. What's the hardest thing about writing a crime novel?
I think just carrying all of the disparate threads in your mind. I think you kind of have to be solving the puzzle at the same time as you're making the puzzle, which can be difficult. I mean, I obviously like it, or I wouldn't, I guess, keep doing it. But I think there's a point for me where I probably finished about half of the book, and I start to struggle to carry all of the kind of weight of the story in my mind at the same time. And at that stage, I sort of have to break it down into sections and tackle them in isolation. I just find I get a little bit too overwhelmed otherwise. So I sort of hit about 50,000 words, and then I sort of have to stop there and divide it up almost into little pieces so I can manage all of the different thoughts and then sort of stitch it together again at the end, which is possibly not the most efficient way to write a book, I'm not sure. But I think that's the difficult bit, is to seamlessly make the story both compelling, sensical, kind of as clever as possible, and make it all not seem too forced and orchestrated at the same time. I think it's the balancing act of that is challenging.
Well, your balancing act works.
Thank you.
How much of a profile do you do for each character before you write them?
I don't put pen to paper on any of them. I normally will just have a list of names that I start to kind of become really attached to, and then it really all just happens in my head. I can sort of see them and I can hear them sometimes, not in a weird way, but just I can kind of see and hear what they would look and sound like. I sort of can picture them as if they're in like a TV show. I think that's the best way to describe it. So they're never based on someone I know, but they'll often be, I'm able to see them in little scenes or sort of little vignettes, and I can sort of, I guess, almost start to put like clothes on them and have little mannerisms. And I find that the more I just think about them, the better place I am just to weave them into scenes. So I know there is some writers that draft, really quite complicated backstories and, sort of histories of these characters. I've never done that. But I do sort of think about them a lot and definitely have an internal picture in my mind of what they look like.
Yeah. What started you on your life of crime?
I just always had ideas that had crime threads in the storyline, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I don't have any family members that are involved in this kind of world. There's nothing really in my history that made me kind of need to wrestle with the truth or anything interesting like that. It was more, I think, just that all of the story ideas I had were crime oriented, and I didn't really think about writing a crime book until I'd written one. And then I guess I started to, my kind of more commercial side of my brain kicked in, I guess, and I realised that that's what I'd written. And the procedural part of it, because I know my books are typically much more sort of police procedurals than they are almost crime thrillers, although they get called that sometimes. And that seems even more strange because, you know, I've got no background in that world, but I've always really liked the neatness of crime and the structure of it. I think I'm really drawn to that rhythm and that kind of the cadence of how crime novels work. And then I think working out what conventions you can kind of break to try to make a crime novel both familiar but unpredictable is quite fun. So it was an accident, I guess, but I think a happy one.
How do you decide the scene of a crime?
How do I describe it?
Or how do you decide the scene of a crime?
Oh, decide. Well, I guess that tends to be informed by the story and the overall setting. I do think it's fun. I mean, because it's fiction and I'm not trying to make light of actual crimes in any way, but I think the artistic license that crime writers are granted, and probably all writers to some extent, but you know, I guess in my first book, that lake, the dark lake, was the scene of the crime, but also quite an important setting for a lot of other scenes in the story. So I think the romanticness of that kind of crime scene was appealing to me because it was sort of memorable and striking, and I think it added an extra layer of mystery. So that was, I guess, pretty key for that story. And then, you know, in The Housemate, the house on Paradise Street in St Kilda, which is a fictional street, it's, you know, the irony of that name, because it was anything but paradise for the girls living there. That house is quite important because it's where everything kind of happened and where their relationship existed. So I often kind of try to weave back the scene of the crime to something more symbolic than just that moment. But also there's sometimes just convenient, you know, places and settings that kind of make sense with the story. So it can kind of be a mixture of both.
What research did you do for your latest novel?
I went to court a lot, actually, so which is something I hadn't really done in the previous books because I didn't really call for it. But with this one, there's a couple of light kind of courtroom scenes, but also I was looking for sort of inspiration for the actual crime itself, and I wanted to do a bit of research into that space. So I won't give away exactly what it was all about, but I did spend a bit of time at court rulings and court cases, which was really interesting. I had a journalist invite me along the initial time that I went, which was great because I also got a really good insight into his world and the people that he talks to and how all the journalists work together, which was super useful. And then I sort of started going to a couple on my own, and yeah, it definitely fed its way into the story in quite a few unexpected ways. Not so much that the actual cases I viewed were sort of lifted and shifted into the book, but just nuances around that environment and how people would feel in that environment, the media sort of scrums outside the courtroom, all of that type of thing, I think was really important in shaping the story. I hope so anyway.
Having been a court reporter, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it was fun.
Who should play your central character on the screen? I guess we're talking about Gemma Woodstock in this case.
I don't know, and it's tricky now because the book has been optioned, and so I've had actual conversations about this, and so that has skewed things for me a little bit. But I'll kind of answer your question a bit generically. I think for Gemma, it just needs to be someone who is quite small in stature because she is quite little, but who's obviously very powerful in the way that she operates and I guess her ability. She's sort of more capable than she thinks. And just that really kind of gritty, grim determination to get to the right answers. You know, someone who's just got absolute focus and yeah, almost sort of blind determination to get to the truth no matter what gets in her way. So someone who's dark-haired and small would be fine. And I don't know, I'm sure there's lots of people that would suddenly seem perfect if that's what was to happen.
Yeah. It's always a tricky question, isn't it? Because readers often imagine the character themselves, you know, sometimes quite differently to how you imagine them as the author.
Completely. And I think sometimes when I read books and then they do turn them into TV shows, I hear about who's been cast sometimes and I kind of probably think, oh, that doesn't seem right. And then you watch it and they're perfect. So I'm very impressed by actors' abilities and casting agents' vision, I guess, because they do often get it right.
Yeah. When and how do you work out plot twists and red herrings?
I think it's a bit haphazard. Like sometimes before I start writing, because I'm a terrible planner, like I don't have any plan, I'll kind of in my head sort of know the start, know the middle, probably know like the big culmination scene and a loose idea of how I want to resolve it. And occasionally sort of little twisty moments will be little bullet points in my head, but they change quite a lot depending on how it plays out. And I mean, one thing that I have really discovered since writing books is just how much hard work your subconscious does without you sort of almost having to tell it to. Like I don't want to sound like I'm impressed with my own brain, but I think all writers have sort of this ability to kind of set a task with their brain in the background, and it will work away at it for you while you're doing other things, and then these revelations will come to you and they'll seem like they're out of the blue, but I think it's because you actually have had that task kind of on the back burner and someone has been tending to it. So I'll often sort of figure things out while I'm doing something else, like I might be at work or, you know, doing something with the kids or whatever, and I'll kind of think, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what happens in that scene, and that makes complete sense because, and it's almost like a snowball where your brain has worked it all out for you and you just need to kind of follow that thread through. So, yeah, like I said, it comes pretty haphazardly to me. I don't really spend a lot of time sitting down thinking about how I'm going to resolve a plot point or a plot twist. I sort of know where it needs to get to and I'll kind of build on it as I go.
Yeah. How do you find time in your day to write?
I mean, sometimes I don't, I think is the answer. Lockdown in Melbourne last year was a little bit of a blessing in a way for me, and I don't mean that flippantly at all, but I had, you know, 2 book deadlines last year and I was pretty nervous about meeting both of them. So the forced kind of nature of having to sit in my house every night and, you know, pretty much focus on that was kind of helpful. But then, you know, over summer I was still finishing off both books and editing and doing sort of various stages of them. So it's just something that I have to prioritize. And if I don't prioritize it, no books come. So I've kind of just gotten myself into that pattern where when I'm really in that mode of having to deliver something or I want to write something, the only person that cares is me. And so I kind of just try to make time to do it. And I try to not wait until I've got big blocks of time because I don't really get that opportunity very often. Yeah. And I found that I used to try to wait until I had like a whole day free before I would even sort of open my laptop and open the file. And I've stopped doing that now. So if I've got an hour free, I'll be like, I've got an hour free. So I'll write for an hour. And if nothing good comes out in that hour, well, that's fine, but at least I've given it a go. So I think everyone has more time than they think they do, but there is also realities of some days just not having much time or things going wrong. And so I just try to kind of not stress about it too much and just do it when I can. And I find that so far that's worked.
Yeah. I love that idea of grabbing an hour when you can rather than waiting for a big block of time.
Yeah.
How do you write about violence?
I don't find it particularly difficult. I don't find writing about anything particularly difficult, really. I kind of am pretty clinical about it. I definitely hold it all at arm's length. And that's not because I don't care about what I'm writing about or some of the characters I don't really, really like, but I don't really feel like I'm in that moment with those characters. It is much more of a the relationship is kind of parallel, I guess. It's not me. So I don't find it particularly difficult. I'm pretty needle phobic, so if there's ever a scene with needles, I definitely find that the hardest thing to write about because it makes me feel really sick. But the violence part, I think it's just part of the story. And so similarly to any scenes, whether it's like an argument or a really sad emotional scene, it's just the story. If I read it back afterwards, I can definitely kind of feel sad about certain scenes or a little bit frustrated or whatever it might be. But while I'm actually writing it, it's very workmanlike, I suppose.
And our last question for tonight, how would you get away with murder?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I guess I'd want to try and do something pretty memorable if I was going to try. But then it would be anonymous, so that would be a bit weird. I mean, I've definitely, I wouldn't say I've learnt any tricks of the trade really, because all of my murderers get caught ultimately. But I mean, gosh, some of the stuff I've researched, it does make you realise that people, just like all kinds of endeavours, some people in the criminal kind of world are incredibly smart and sly and wily, and others are pretty stupid and do really dumb things. So it's kind of a bit of both, and some get away with it kind of irrespective of which method they go with. So it is a weird thing to research and to write about, but I have no aspirations to do it in real life. So I think the fictional mode it suits me. Yep.
Oh, I'm pleased to hear that. Sarah, thanks for being with us today on Murder Monday.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.